we are going to talk about Air Canada, which is the flag carrier and the largest airline of Canada, known for providing passenger and cargo services, both domestic and internationally. They were founded in 1937 as Trans-Canada Airlines. It was later rebranded to Air Canada in 1965. The airline is a member of the Star Alliance, and it operates a fleet of very modern aircraft, Boeing and Airbus. It operates a range of services from economy to premium cabins, and Air Canada has significant presence in the major global hubs and is recognized for its commitment to safety, innovation, and customer service. So they're a pretty big deal in Canada.
Very big deal. And as we start off here, Julien, let's talk about the early days, where all this began with Air Canada. Excuse me.
So Air Canada, Canada is the second largest country in the world, and so the geography is very vast. And so this poses a lot of problems because bringing the country together is really a challenge geographically and because of its terrain. And so in the early days, Canada became united because of the Trans-Canada Railroad. And then in 1937, when Air Canada emerged as Trans-Canada Airlines, it was actually a subsidiary of the Canadian National Railway, which was created to establish a reliable national air service for Canadians and uniting the geographic diversity of the country. And so its goal was in line with Canada's national interest, which was to foster regional connectivity and promote economic development, as well as to support the expanding Canadian economy during the pre-World II era. And so keep in mind that the first flight that Air Canada did was on September 1st, 1937, using a Lockheed L-10A Electra aircraft. And so it was a small aircraft, and that flight went from Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way to Seattle, Washington, to the United States. And while it had small beginnings, this laid the foundation for what Air Canada is today.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that became evolution from the transformation into Air Canada from major milestones.
Well, that's correct. So there had been several milestones in the Air Canada history. So one was the creation of the airline in 1937. And then in later years, through technological pioneering, Air Canada was the leader in aviation technology and introduced the first computerized reservation system. And in 1988, privatization within the airlines began, and the Canadian government began the process of privatizing Air Canada. So therefore, Air Canada became a corporation of itself without the price control imposed by the government of Canada. And so this gave the airline much more flexibility to become a competitive business partner, both domestically as well as internationally. And in 2000, Air Canada acquired Canadian Airlines, which consolidated its position as Canada's dominant carrier and expanded its reach to more international destinations. And so before we had Air Canada and Canadian Airlines competing with each other, now that they've merged, they're able to dominate the domestic market as well as international markets. And in 2004, Air Canada went through restructuring because of financial challenges, and the airline emerged more economically efficient, and they cut costs, and they adapted to a competitive global airline that we know today. And in 2017, Air Canada celebrated its 80th anniversary or birthday. And so by doing so, they introduced the new livery that we know today, as well as the new uniforms that we see. So it's the dark gray with the red tie or a scarf. And they also reinforce their branding and modernize their image. So these are important steps that created the airline that we know of it today.
And that comes with that. That always comes with challenges. Dave Gorman, what were some of the challenges that Air Canada was facing there?
It seems like some of the challenges that they've faced and had to work through and overcome were things that were happening with a lot of airlines. But as Julien said, the history of Canada, the size of the country, bringing people together. I mean, a lot was happening with trains at one point, but then, as was it 1937? I think you said, Julien, the first flight. Tying things together. And that steady growth was something that was pretty crucial. But there have been plenty of economic challenges. There have been depressions and recessions and union actions and wages and machinists, all kinds of things that have created challenges for them, and downsizing and expanding and contracting and things that are not atypical. They certainly weren't just happening to carriers like Air Canada, but they certainly struggled during the COVID years, like most transportation industries did at that time. But their growth has been pretty steady. I saw a chart, I think, on the Wikipedia page. It was just showing the growth in paid passenger, let's see here, revenue passenger kilometers in millions. And the growth from 1965 to 1980 was about 4.5 times the growth. The mileage went from 5,702,000 to just about 23 million miles. But then the next 15 years, it grew by 20 times. Just an incredible amount of growth, and they've risen to the challenge. They have expanded their fleet. They're lots of wide bodies, the destinations that are worldwide. They're not just limited, obviously, to Canada, and there really is nothing quite like it in the U.S., where you've got this national carrier. Their reach, their partners that they had, the globalization outreach that they have, the destinations that they have within and outside of Canada. It's pretty amazing. And having gone through all the economic challenges that we mentioned, the normal growth, the modernization programs, the selling of stock, all those things, they've come through it pretty well. And they seem to be positioned as they regain their position economically, to be a long leader in international flight. And certainly that's the way to go domestically. I would not had a chance to fly Air Canada. I've flown into Canada a few times, so I've been on partner airlines that were U.S. based, but they have a great fleet of aircraft that I know we'll talk a little bit more about, and they're positioned for long range stability.
Well, Dave Gorman, you really hit the nail on the head, because indeed Air Canada did face some challenging periods, like all airlines, during the attacks on September 11th. The SARS outbreak, as well as the pandemic, hit the airline industry very hard. But keep in mind that the airlines did bring the solution, which was they delivered the solution during the pandemic, which was the delivery of PPE. Personal protective equipment. And so this really helped in bringing the solution to the globe of personal protective equipment. So based on my business background, we often talk about a SWOT analysis, which includes the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of a given business. And so I've conducted a quick SWOT analysis of Air Canada. So the strengths include a very strong reputation and in the airline industry, as well as their relationships within the star lines. Some of their weaknesses include the high operating costs and vulnerability to the economic fluctuations. The opportunities lie in the global expansion of the aviation industry, especially in Asian markets and emerging markets, as well as within the Star Alliance. And some of the threats, can you believe it, are also internal within Canada, the emergence of low-cost carriers, as well as the ongoing economic uncertainties, the willingness of passengers to actually part with their money, which is always an ongoing challenge. Back to you, Derrick.
Yeah, and absolutely true. And David Rowe, innovations of this company. What can you tell us about it?
Well, actually, they have been very innovative. I have got a long list of things dating back to 1939 where they were innovating. The first thing on the list is oxygen systems. Air Canada was one of the first airlines to have an entire fleet of unpressurized aircraft equipped with fixed oxygen systems. They are called rebreathing bags. And so they had, oxygen on all their aircraft, one of the first ones. Another big safety issue was de-icing. Back in 38 and 39, they were the first airline to equip their fleet with alcohol de-icing nozzles on the windscreens so that the windscreens wouldn't fog up and ice over. They also were, in the 1960s, they did electric de-icing as well. So they were, on the forefront of safety for de-icing. And obviously, being Canada, they deal with a lot of cold and snowy weather. So that's a major thing that they've got to do. Another safety thing was they were in the 60s a part of the development of the black box. If you're familiar with airlines and crashes, one of the first things they want to do is they want to find the black box recorder so that they can get the information from what happened to the aircraft, what the things were being said. And Air Canada was one of those involved in the development of the multi-channel flight recorder, or the black box. Huge thing that all airlines use today. They were in the 1963 reservation automation. They were the world's first computerized reservation system. Everything's on computers today, but back in the 60s, that was kind of a revolutionary thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Also in the 60s, they became jet freighters. They brought those into their system, DC-8s, and became a jet freighter operation, which was a sort of a new thing. At that time, you still had a lot of turboprops and piston engine aircraft flying around, and they were all jets. They also were all turbine with their aviation fleet. They got rid of their last propeller-driven DC-3s, and everything was jets. Speaking of jets, they were the first customer for Airbus's A320 and the Airbus A319. The A320 in 1990, the A319 in 1996. So they were the first customers on that. At some point, we need to circle back around and talk about a little controversy about being the first customer with Airbus, but we'll get back to that later.
Absolutely.
Another big innovation was they were the first scheduled airline in the world to offer exclusively smoke-free flights. So today we kind of take it for granted that, you don't smoke on a flight. But back in the 60s and the 70s, that was, 80s, very common, people smoked. But in October of 1990, Air Canada put a stop to it. Apparently they did some test flights. Passengers loved it. That became their main thing across all of their airlines. They also did personal seat back entertainment systems in 2005. They had lie flat beds installed in some aircraft, their long haul aircraft, in 2005. They did electronic boarding passes. And, today we take it for granted that everybody's got a phone and electronic this and, app that. Well, they started out in 2009 with mobile flight notifications. They have Air Canada apps. They even have a cargo mobile app that you can track your cargo. They have their Air Canada Vacations organization. So when you take a tour, they've got an app for that. They've got mobile booking apps. They've even got Apple Watch apps now. So they are big on the mobile end of things. And one of the other ones is they were one of the early adopters of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. So there's that. Wi-Fi in the sky. They were an early adopter of Wi-Fi. They're also using biofuels now. They're testing those starting in 2016. And going back to the Dreamliner, this one's kind of cool. Air Canada is the first Canadian airline to use virtual reality technology to simulate the experience of flying on a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. So if you're a travel agent or a passenger and you want to get an idea of what your flight's going to be like, Air Canada can provide you with that feeling and that look so that you know exactly what you're going to get when you take a flight on Air Canada. So a very technologically savvy company, very innovative for, going back to the 30s. They've done a lot of great things.
Yeah, and you have piqued, I'm sure, all of our listeners and our interest. What is the Airbus controversy?
So, at one point, let me find my note here so I make sure I've got my information right. Here we go. Yes. They called it the Airbus affair. So in the 1980s, Airbus was trying to take a foothold in North America. Boeing pretty much owned North America. In the States, in Canada, everybody flew Boeing aircraft. So Airbus struck up a deal with the then Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, and I believe it was a German Airbus representative. Apparently there was some collusion going on where they worked out a deal for Air Canada to purchase Airbus A320s, which was how they became the first operator in the North America of that aircraft. And the problem was that at that time, Air Canada was a state-owned entity, a corporation. They weren't on their own yet. So it was government interfering with, the way the business worked. And Boeing thought they had the deal done. They actually bought de Havilland Canada in anticipation of using their facilities and their services in Canada for their aircraft that were going to be purchased. Well, when Air Canada went with Airbus, there was a huge uproar, and this Airbus affair, it took until 2010 for it to be rectified and to everybody's satisfaction. So there was a collusion scandal with regards to the Airbus being an aircraft in Air Canada.
Very, very interesting. I did not know that one. And as we jump into legacy here, I'm going to take this one all the way across the board because I want everybody's thoughts on the legacy of this airline, starting with you, Julien.
Well, Air Canada did play a big part in the development and the unification of Canada. And keep in mind that in the early days, aircraft were designed to transport mail and communication, and then slowly passengers desired or showed an expression to embark on the flight. And so this opened up the opportunity for passenger travel. And now it's many airlines have the majority is passenger travel, but also communication, freight, cargo, as well as live animals, expensive items such as luxury cars, furs and technology, medications, human tissue. So the airlines, they all transport those things. There are lots of development in Air Canada routes, and it has supported regional trade, tourism, and the movement of labor across many provinces within Canada. And it has supported the national integration, linking different parts of Canada closely together and promote national unity, integration, and making it easier for people from different provinces to interact with each other through travel and share experiences, thus uniting the Canadian culture, which is so important for Canada because it's so big and we have so many different time zones as well. Back to you, Derrick.
Dave Gorman, your thoughts on the legacy of Air Canada?
Well, as I mentioned, personally, not ever having flown on it, but having relatives who take a great amount of pride in Canadian aviation. This is the face of Canadian aviation as far as national and international carrier. So legacy-wise, I think, as Julien mentioned quite ably, tying the country together, but then flying the flag as they do. That in itself is quite a legacy. I have to mention, and I know my friend Mr. Rowe probably has this in his notes as well. And Julien, I hope I'm pronouncing the name of this city correctly. Is it pronounced Gimli or Gimli?
I think it's Gimli.
Gimli, yeah.
Yep.
The famous situation that Air Canada 767, the Gimli glider, that due to a fueling miscalculation, this plane ran out of fuel at about 40,000 feet and glided from about 35,000 feet to a safe landing, unplanned and everything else. But I remember hearing about that shortly after it happened in the mid 80s and just being so impressed with the professionalism of the crew, the cockpit crew. It was not, as I've read more about it, it was a fueling error, a calculation error, but incredible that they brought that plane down safely.
So while it was a Canadian carrier, it's that incident did not refer directly to Air Canada. It was Air Transat that incident happened. And coincidentally, I was a flight attendant during that era. And I remember that day when that plane came down, the whole company across the Canada was just up in arms because it was the first major incident that happened. So it was Flight 236 from Toronto to Lisbon that happened. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that's another thing is Air Canada has a very, very good safety record. They've flown a lot of miles and done it very safely. There was like one accident from back in the mid 80s where a DC-9 crashed, and I think there were like 21 people that were killed. Other than that, I mean, all of their accidents are minor injuries. Maybe the aircraft is written off, but they've been a very safe airline, for the last 10, 15 years. So a very good history of safety. What is it? They're flying 1,600 scheduled flights a day, 5.1 or 51 million passengers in a year. So that's a lot of flights, and they're doing it very safely. It's a good company.
And that's a heck of a legacy to have, is that kind of safety record. And I was looking through the fleet of Air Canada, and there's not a single aircraft in their fleet that we have covered. And it made me think about how far we still have to go with this podcast. So there's so many airplanes out there to cover. Julien, you had something to say?
David Rowe, you really hit the nail on the head. So with Air Canada before this podcast, I was looking at the Air Canada in-flight safety video. And so this is the video that they show on board the aircraft to all the passengers. And it encompasses all the cabin safety features. And they showcase photography from different regions of Canada. So I encourage all our listeners to look that up. But more importantly, the safety record of Air Canada, and most airlines for that matter, is due to their SMS, safety management systems, which is the analysis of safety and incidences that occur to an airline the potential of that incident happening and the impact to the organization. And so there's an entire crew that do safety management systems, and they study this. And so all the reports, any safety incursion or incident is reported and calculated and added up. And so if they find that it's with outside the acceptable ranges, then they implement mitigation strategies to make sure that incident type gets reduced into a manageable range. And so this is also an important part of airline management and a distinct career. So it's called safety management systems. If anybody's interested in safety and the study of safety, the risk management of airlines is always an interesting study. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And so before we get into final thoughts, I need everybody to put on their thinking cap because Julien has some trivia for us.
Well, thank you very much, Derrick. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Does anybody remember in what year Air Canada was officially founded and what was their name? Who has the answer to that question?
Yeah, I remember that, at least the year, because I talked about it too, 1937.
Well, that's correct.
But they were not Air Canada yet, right?
That's correct. So who has the name?
Trans-Canadian Airlines.
Trans-Canada Airlines, that's correct. So you'll see it on their old livery, TCA, which was their logo that they used at the time. So the second question is, when did Trans-Canada Airlines change its name to Air Canada as we know it today?
1965.
Well, that is correct. And that can be found on the Air Canada website. So now moving on to question number 3. What was the aircraft used in Air Canada's first commercial flight in 1937?
Good old Lockheed. Lockheed L-10.
That's correct. Very good. What were the 2 cities that connected Air Canada's first ever transcontinental flights in 1939?
That was Vancouver to Seattle.
In 1939, so it was...
Oh, wait. Oh, transcontinental means within, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Not
so
All right.
That one's Montreal to Vancouver.
That's correct. We had the flight connected from Montreal to Vancouver, and that's available on the Air Canada Historical Archives. In what year did Air Canada join the Star Alliance? And what was that's the world's largest airline alliance? In what year did Air Canada join the Star Alliance?
1997.
1997, that's correct. And so it's a conglomeration and an amalgamation of cooperation of multiple airlines that agree to service multiple destinations. And so you can have, for the passenger, it's the same experience. So they've standardized their service flows between the different classes so that the business class experience would be consistent from each as you transition from one airline to another. For example, if I book a flight from Toronto to Zimbabwe, and I'm flying with Lufthansa from Toronto to Frankfurt, and then Ethiopian Airlines from Frankfurt to Harare, Zimbabwe, the experience is the same. The service is standardized. Baggages are checked all the way through to the final destination without incurring additional fees, that type of stuff.
That really simplifies the travel and probably puts a lot of people at ease when you're going through all those airports, maybe for the first time, and making those connections.
This is absolutely correct. So it does make the seamless travel experience for the passenger, but it does not come without its hiccups because it requires a lot of coordination on the back end. What significant milestone did Air Canada achieve in 1917 regarding its branding identity?
Well, if it was 1917, that was before they got started, but in 2017...
You want to redo that one, Julien?
Sorry, 2017 and 2017.
If you want to redo the whole question, I'll edit it.
Okay. So let's try that again. Sorry. What
That's all
significant
right.
what significant milestone did Air Canada achieve in 2017 regarding its branding identity?
That's when they decided to go with the raccoon livery. They went with the black and the gray and the red.
That's correct. The new livery, the new uniforms, and their enhanced their overall branding image. How many countries does Air Canada currently serve with its current flight operations?
At least one. Sorry.
Producer Shay Jones, ladies and gentlemen.
There we go.
My information says 64 domestic destinations and 158 international destinations.
Well, this is correct. So it includes 60 countries, and that's available on the Air Canada guide and their website. What unique safety measure was Air Canada's the first North American airline to introduce in response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Mandatory face coverings.
That's correct. Face coverings for all the passengers. And finally, what was the name of Air Canada's frequent flyer program, and when was it introduced?
Oh, that is such a Canadian question. Who's going to know that unless they're flying it? Come on.
Well, of course, I am from Canada.
He's just sore because he got one wrong.
That's it.
I am from Canada, and so their frequent flyer program is called Aeroplan. And
that was going to be my guess.
There you go. So they many stores, if you go make a purchase, they ask you, could you collect Aeroplan points? And so you can collect points on gas and other purchases, and so it's always a fun thing to do.
Chances are with those points, though, like even with like some of those credit cards you get, you earn miles and stuff, it's probably not 1 point per mile. It's usually like a bunch of points to earn flights and stuff. It's usually way more than normal.
Well, this is very true. But I always say, you got to start with a couple of points.
You got to start somewhere.
You got to just make a couple of inches down the runway to get to that bar service peanuts, and you just come right back home.
Yep.
Rack up those points. Guys, as we jump into final thoughts of Air Canada, starting with you, Mr. David Rowe.
This was a very interesting. Obviously I'm familiar with Air Canada. I follow their airplanes online and see them flying over, but didn't know anything really about the organization. And they've had their ups and downs, but they're a really strong flight, airline. They've got great products. We were talking about they're flying Airbus, A330s, A320s, they're Boeing 777s, 787 Dreamliners. They're flying top end aircraft, providing great service. And, they're just a major carrier that's just right close to us that you just don't know a lot about. So I was glad we discussed this one.
Very good topic for this episode. Dave Gorman, final thoughts.
And we didn't really even talk about their cargo operations, which is another huge, And so, looking at ADSB and Flight Radar 24 and seeing aircraft flying over this part of the country, there's a lot of flights going over us that are Air Canada branded flights. I was kind of surprised to see that it's been 20 years ago this month that they phased out passenger operation on the 747. We think of the Queen of the Skies as being such a, tremendous airplane. And of course it was, but, we've certainly moved on in aviation in terms of what is the standard. And Air Canada, as David just said, and Julien's made the point many times, they have a very modern fleet, and they're setting a standard, and it's a standard that rivals, and maybe in some cases is, better than what we're flying domestically in the U.S. in terms of what they've gone through and where they're headed.
They are for sure. And I know Julien suggested this subject for this podcast. And I know, Julien, this airline's near and dear to your heart. What's your closing thoughts on Air Canada?
Well, Air Canada is not only our flagship carrier, but it's also a big employer. Many people across Canada work for Air Canada, and Air Canada does contribute to a lot of employment in remote cities, directly and indirectly. Those who are interested in applying for a career with Air Canada, you can find more information on their careers page at the Air Canada page, careers. And if anybody's interested in pursuing a career, I highly recommend my book called The Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation, which is available on Amazon. And it discusses various careers such as pilot, air traffic controller, and other airline career paths.
David Rowe, you talked about following Air Canada some on social media. Do you have any Air Canada over on Aerophile that you've caught a picture of, or that you may have?
I don't believe that I do. Trying to think, I've got it. Like Dave was saying, we get high flyers that fly over us as they're passing, you know, down toward the Caribbean or Mexico or whatever. So no, I don't believe I've got any Air Canada. So I'll have to put that one on the list for the next time I'm up close to the border and try and catch a few.
So what do you have for us coming up on Aerophile?
I have got a bunch of Virginia Beach air show videos on my YouTube channel. The Tricolore is out. I've got SPAD and a Spitfire video, and coming up next is the F-22 Raptor. So if you like jet engine noise over the ocean, I've got a great little video coming out on Friday for you at Aerophile YouTube.
Good deal. And Dave Gorman, what do you got going on social media for us?
Well, it's been a little bit slow, although I was thrilled to get out to the airport here in Knoxville over the weekend to see the A-10s that came in for the flyover before the football game. So there was a flight of 4 that came in and stayed a while to watch them come in. It was really, really cool and good to see them. Like most of the people who do this kind of stuff, when they're spotting A-10s, there's always a sense that is this going to be one of the last times we see them? Because we know that they're apparently once again maybe possibly on their way out. So they were cool to see. I didn't take any videos, so it's just some pictures. So nothing much on my YouTube, but some pictures on my Instagram there.
Definitely. And Julien Martin, you was talking about your book there about getting young people involved in aviation. Where can folks get a hold of you to get some career coaching?
So they can always find me on my website, julienmartinson.com, as well as I'm active on other social media streams such as Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I also wanted to highlight the trade show coming up next week, October 24th. It's called Dare to Innovate. It's located at the Downsview Aerospace Institute of Research. And so a lot of people will be there for the industry, for research and development of aerospace and aviation. And so I highly encourage those people who are interested to reach out, attend the event, and you can find more information online.
And spell your name for us, because it's spelled just a little bit different than what we're used to in the U.S.
It's Julien, Julien, and Martinson is spelled Martinson. So that's julienmartinson.com.
And you can find all of these links that we talk about in the description below. And Dave Gorman, our History of Aviation podcast social media. We've got the YouTube channel, the TikTok channel. I don't think I've left anything out, but so we got YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and a Facebook group.
All of those things. Lots of places to interact with us. You want to mention about our status on Spotify?
Yes, we are an exclusive Spotify podcast now, which if you're listening on Apple, you're probably thinking, well, how am I listening on Apple? You can listen on all the same platforms that you normally do, but we are more of an exclusive Spotify podcast now. So go over to Spotify. If you're not on it, there's a lot more content there. So yeah, I enjoyed it, guys.
Absolutely. Great evening. Thank you.
Yes, Julien.
Thank you very much, Derrick, for all your efforts in bringing us on Spotify. I really appreciate it, and I think it'll elevate the exposure of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You only had to beat up like 3 people, so
that's it. Yeah. we got tired of putting. Yeah, exactly. Definitely enjoyed it, guys. And Shay Jones, our producer, say hey, Jay. Shay.
Hello. I'm here and ready. I moved my camera.
Every time he comes on, his camera's in a different location.
Yeah.
I was showing how my camera moves around and follows me. Now he's trying to show off.
That's it right there. Hey, look, guys, mine does the same thing. Yeah, look at that.
For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, Julien Martinson, Shay Jones producing, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.